JB here, JB here. Hope everyone's doing outstanding. Friday, April 11th, 8:59 a.m. on this fine morning. Talk quick about the market. Some names I'm looking at go from there. S&P futures are actually kind of flat at the moment. End of a volatile trading week, right? So Monday, 8.5%, Tuesday, 7.2%, Wednesday, 10.7%, and yesterday, 4.65% trading ranges, right? So we'll see what today brings. Uh, Not much in the way of headlines today outside of China putting their tariff rate on U.S. Imports up to 125% and saying that's it, they're not going to do any more. To me, it's almost like a moot point because I think once you get over 100%, it's like it's going to screech imports down to almost zero, right? So it's kind of more just a statement as opposed to actual. You can put it up to 1,000% now. I don't think it's going to matter much. I mean, outside of the necessities, but just crazy stuff. You just hope some of this stuff gets worked out soon, or things will just it just yeah, uncertainty still looms. This morning at J.P. Morgan, Wells Fargo report earnings. J.P. Morgan similar. I mean, you already had Jamie Dimon on Fox Wednesday talk, so kind of reiterated his stance. JP Morgan actually had a great quarter beat, kept their guidance. Their trading business was the best in history. The volatility the first quarter of the year actually obviously helped, and probably bodes well for for the earnings season. We'll have to see how this all plays out. Wells Fargo similar, decent quarter, but they expect turmoil, what have you. JP Morgan actually added to their reserves, right? So, I mean, if you were back in 2008, some of the reasons some of these banks got destroyed is because they weren't holding enough capital reserves, right? And the Fed used to do as 2008 wound down, they came with the Dodd whatever rule, whatever that was. They came out with some things for the banks too, where they had to have a certain amount of capital. They raised that capital limit, and then they did stress tests. So, like I always say, like 2008 there's a lot of instruments now that weren't in place back then, right? So to see a bank like JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, those, I mean, take a huge event, but though they have so much capital reserves now, that's probably not an option. Obviously, the regional banks, we had that issue a couple of years ago. But he just pretty much reiterated what he said Wednesday. So I don't think there's any red flags there. It's just a matter of this stuff gets worked out. So you already have Japan's coming next week. Supposedly the trade advisor for the EU's coming. You kind of want to see more positive headlines here. Otherwise, I think this market's just going to start to, it's going to be like an anchor and we're just going to pull back to lows again. And then you still have this yield situation, right? And yields are up right now. Again, the 10 years up nearly 2% this morning. Uh, it's not a good thing that you would think that flight to safety. I've been saying this for a while that wouldn't be the case, and now you have to think, is there now a negative stigma around the U.S. that some of these countries are pulling back their holdings of U.S. debt and moving it somewhere else, right? You can't rule that out now, right? I mean, that's kind of like, hey, let's get back. They're gonna put a tariff. Hell, I'll sell their debt. So hopefully that's not the case either. And then also take a look at the US dollar, and it's down nearly 10% from January 13th. Just remarkable stuff. And if you're putting a 10% baseline tariff on all these countries, we pretty much just did it by our US dollar getting destroyed, right? If it's down, if the US dollar is down 10%, that means all imports into the country. Obviously, it's a case by case scenario depending on someone's country's currency. It doesn't mean the US dollar dropped 10% across the entire landscape. It's a net, but I mean, you have to think most of these countries, imports were expensive already to begin with. So now it's like a double whammy. So again, these are things you would think that yields would drop, and that hasn't been the case. So, and now that the U.S. dollar's weak, it's just not scenarios that bode well. So you put on watches. Hopefully, yields start to turn around. The U.S. dollar flattens. Maybe it can strengthen up a little bit. And I used to talk about the U.S. dollar being too strong. You don't want it too strong, right? But it's the same token. You don't want it too weak either. It's like we need a Goldilocks scenario. Anyway, for the SPY, I always try to do the silver lining, glass half full kind of scenarios, but inside day yesterday. So despite the market being down 6% intraday, which has been the biggest drop so far, it found some support around 509, 510 on the SPY. We bounced. So kind of watching those areas here today. 509. I mean, I would hope we don't get down there again today. 535 on the upside. I'd actually prefer if we do break out, and if it's inside day, if it's not an inside day and we have an outside day, to the upside would bode well into next week. And then hopefully we start getting some, not only the earnings updates, but we get some some updates in regards to deals, right? Would love to see some deals come out, especially Vietnam's the first one. I think that's important. And then you're gonna see some scrambling. I mean, people. I don't think a lot of folks were thinking cars at first with the tariffs, but now you got to start thinking about like the apparel. I mean, that's a huge. There's no way we can produce the same apparel at the costs that are done in some of these countries. Which I put tweets and stuff out on FinTwit, and you get people saying it's negative connotations, right? I mean, there's horrible conditions in those uh, places that produce the textiles. It's just fact, reality. But that's some of the reason the costs are so low. So obviously, I mean, there has to be something done to protect the well-being of folks as well. But there's no way those same articles of clothing and things like that can be produced in the U.S. Same cost, at least not anywhere in the next year or two. I mean, there would have to be and then people have to want to do the job. It's just a whole all right, so rants for other days. So hopefully an inside day here today. Want to see markets at least hold the ground. The VIX, which is over 40 again. I mean, it looked like okay, that was it. That was the highs on the VIX on Wednesday, and boom, we're back over the 40s. Hopefully that starts to come down, and then we can get maybe some tradable ranges here, right? All right, so that's kind of overall markets. So now individual names, GameStop was showing relative strength yesterday. It was flat yesterday, and the premiums were elevated. I'm like, why didn't it do this Wednesday? The stock was up 8%. The premiums were in the red. So good sign there. I went out and finally got the May strikes. And then you look at this setup, and I was talking about the last time it broke both its 50 and 200-day moving average was back. Roaring Kitty had his tweets, right? So and has announced the stake. Not saying it's deja vu, he's going to do it again, but I just think it's a nice setup here. Not only that, I think it's somewhat of a risk off asset. I mean, you take a look at Bitcoin today is up nearly 3%. I have to, I think it trades over 30 and if not higher in the coming weeks. You had another insider director buy yesterday. That makes it three insider buys, including Ryan Cohen. Um, and then I talk about they haven't even announced their plan of what they're doing, how they're going to buy the Bitcoin. And I mean, obviously they did the $1.3 billion offering, but is that going to be it? And they'll hold the cash. I think that'd be an ideal scenario. So anyway, I like that one for upside. And not only that, I think you can do well regardless of what the market does here. Pending, I mean, I was saying on the rant yesterday afternoon, I mean, if the market continues to tank, obviously it's going to pull down all ships, right? And rising tide lifts all ships. A waterfall pulls all the ships down. So that's GameStop. Also yesterday afternoon, well, it was like after the noon hour, once the SPY started breaking 515, I got a little worried that there might be like a snowball, right? And once the market starts going, it might be hard to stop. SQQQ calls look inexpensive on a risk reward basis. I keep calling them the shit hit the fan positions, right? So got some of those 50 strikes at 25 cents. Within about 30 minutes, they were close to a double. I was thinking of locking them in. I'm like, I was worried about it, maybe a gap down. If you watch the overnight session, again, yields, you continue to see issues with the yields. The TLT was dipping, and it's like in the back of my head, I think something's going to break at some point, or at least that's the worry. So don't want to be in a spot where I'm, completely caught with my pants down. And not only that, I put it on FinTwit this morning in the chat room, like you wake up in the morning or you checking the futures overnight, and I wouldn't be surprised to see a 5% down day, or up day, right? I mean, either scenarios would not surprise me, which is crazy, but that's why I think it's important, at least somewhat for sanity and somewhat for protecting positions, and then somewhat for obviously making money to have some of these hedges on. So I'll continue to look for SQQQ calls as a potential position, obviously to make money, but a hedge for more downside if that happens. Then on the flip side too, Intel, you had that negative piece on the CEO yesterday in regards to his investments in China companies and the security risks. Stock was down anyway with the rest of the market. Once it started getting near 20, I figured I didn't want to lose the profits, so close the calls out. I'm not sure if I'll revisit here short term, but if the market does find some footing and the chip names start to go, could be a name that maybe it starts trading back over 22. So I'll be watching that one. And then the other names, I think it's just a matter of time. I think Vietnam's like, I wouldn't call it the first shoe to drop in regards to the tariffs, but if there's a deal, I could just see Wayfair, Restoration Hardware really starting to take off. So still have some Wayfair freebies. I mean, the stock took it on a chin yesterday, 11%, but similar, I was talking the same thing on Tuesday. You look at these candles and it's like inside day and the candle's small, but it's down 11% yesterday, right? So still like this one for a bounce into the 30s. I talked about that gap fill 30.99. Still, I locked in most of my 30s for next week, so I'll probably look for some more strikes depending on what it does here today. Same with Deck, still holding those freebies. Lock some of those in on Wednesday. That was down 5% on yesterday. Again, inside day. I think it trades up near 120 on a positive developments. And then Restoration Hardware. So I just had a couple of those 200s left. Of course, in hindsight, on Wednesday, maybe I should have closed the last few out, but still held on to those. I would not be surprised that, this the CEO is very passionate about his stock price. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's some announcement of a monster buyback or something if the stock stays down here, which would lead me to kind of try and maybe I'll look for some spec calls again into next week. Also, don't forget next week, markets closed for Good Friday on Friday. So that's why the strike say April 17th. Markets closed on Friday. Other names, still Netflix. Was watching it yesterday. Didn't do too much during the day, but it's kind of holding ground. I think it's up 8% this week. So that's a name. And you have Needham adjusting their price target again this morning on Netflix. And I think that's it. Of course, yields are hitting highs here. I mean, those are scenarios you don't want to see. You don't want to see yields rising, the dollar selling, and then eventually it's gonna roll over. Right? It's gonna roll over into markets, the debt market, right? It's just not a good market to see have these swings. So, all right, let's have a great day. If things get nutty by noon, I'll be back on audio. Also, just like last Friday, don't be surprised if I do a lot of lottos today and small size spec lottos. Uh, Probably, ironically enough, I'm aggressive. We'll have a flat trading day today, but if not, small becomes big very quickly on some of these names. So let's have a great day. I'll be back. Rock and roll.